March 7th, 1945. 7 minutes past 3 in the afternoon. Remagen, Germany. A 28-year-old American lieutenant named Karl Timmermann stands at the western bank of the Rhine River and stares at something his commanders had told him would not exist. A bridge, intact, standing, unblown. The Ludendorff Railroad Bridge, 525 feet of steel and stone, rises out of the river fog like something from another age. German soldiers are running across it. Explosions are already going off on the far bank. And somewhere on the eastern side, German engineers are frantically trying to trigger the demolition charges wired into the bridge's foundation. Every Allied war planner had assumed the Germans would destroy every bridge over the Rhine before the enemy crossed. Every single one. The Rhine was Germany's last great natural defensive line. Letting the Allies cross it intact was, in German strategic thinking, simply not possible. And yet, there it stood. Timmermann did not wait for orders. He crossed. Within 24 hours, the United States Army had a bridgehead on the eastern bank of the Rhine River for the first time since Napoleon. Adolf Hitler's response was immediate, and it was savage. He ordered the bridge destroyed by every weapon available to the Third Reich. V-2 ballistic missiles, Arado 234 jet bombers, Karl Garrett giant mortars, frogmen with explosive charges, artillery barrages, infantry counterattacks. 10 days of relentless assault, and the bridge held. This is the story of the Remagen Bridge, why it survived, what it cost, and why Hitler's desperate multi-weapon campaign to destroy a single railroad bridge became one of the most revealing episodes of the entire Second World War. To understand Remagen, you have to understand the Rhine. The river runs roughly north to south through western Germany for approximately 860 miles. At Remagen, in the winter of 1945, it stretched more than 1,000 feet across, wide, fast, and brutally cold. The Germans had turned the Rhine into a strategic concept, not just a river. Field Marshal Gerd von Hunstedt and his successors had built their entire Western defensive doctrine around one assumption: the Allies would never cross the Rhine intact. The moment Allied troops broke through the Siegfried Line, German engineers would detonate the bridges. The Allies would be stopped at the river's edge. Germany would buy time to regroup. There were approximately 60 major bridges over the Rhine. By early March of 1945, German engineers had blown every single one of them, except one: the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen. The bridge had been built between 1916 and 1918 during the First World War, specifically to move troops and supplies to the Western Front. It was a through-truss railroad bridge, meaning the structural framework rose above the road deck rather than sitting below it. Twin stone towers anchored each bank. The towers were hollow, each containing tunnels and chambers that the German military had used as storage and personnel shelters throughout the war. The bridge was not designed to carry heavy vehicle traffic. It was a railroad bridge. But it was crossing the Rhine. And to an American army that had been planning a Rhine crossing for months, that distinction meant almost nothing. By early March of 1945, the United States First Army, commanded by General Courtney Hodges, had broken through the last major German defensive line west of the Rhine. The 9th Armored Division, part of III Corps, was pushing toward the river along several axes. The division commander, Major General John Leonard, had instructed his units to move fast and look for any opportunity. Combat Command B of the 9th Armored, commanded by Brigadier General William Hoge, received the order to push toward the Rhine near Remagen. Nobody expected to find a bridge standing. The man on the ground was Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Engemann, commanding the 1st Battalion, 66th Armored Regiment. His lead elements, tanks, and infantry from Task Force Engemann crested the ridge west of Remagen at approximately 12:30 in the afternoon on March 7th. They looked down at the valley. The bridge was there. Engemann immediately contacted Hoge. Hoge contacted 3rd Corps Commander Major General John Milliken. The chain of command moved with unusual speed. Meanwhile, at the bridge itself, the German commander responsible for demolition was a 36-year-old captain named Willy Bratke. He had fewer than 300 mixed troops, a combination of regular Wehrmacht soldiers, Volkssturm home defense militia, Hitler Youth members, and a handful of anti-aircraft crews. He was supposed to have received an engineer unit to handle the demolition properly. They had not arrived. Bratke had one engineer officer at the bridge, Captain Karl Friesenhahn, who had personally supervised the wiring of the demolition charges. The charges were set. The detonator was ready. But when Friesenhahn turned the key at approximately 3:15 in the afternoon, after American troops were already descending the hill toward Remagen, only a fraction of the main charge detonated. The bridge shook. A geyser of wood and debris shot skyward from the deck. The bridge stood. Friesenhahn ran to check the charge. The main demolition cable had been cut, almost certainly by an American artillery shell that had landed near the bridge earlier in the day. A backup ignition system triggered a smaller charge, enough to damage the deck planking, but not enough to drop the spans into the river. Friesenhahn tried to detonate a second time using a different method. The bridge shook again. The bridge stood. Lieutenant Karl Timmermann, commanding Company A of the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, crossed. The Americans who crossed the Ludendorff Bridge were not simply brave men in the right place at the right time. They were the forward edge of an industrial and logistical machine of a scale Germany could no longer match, had never been able to match, and had been losing ground against since 1942. By March of 1945, the United States Army had approximately 3,100,000 soldiers in Europe. The First Army alone fielded more than 300,000 men and had access to thousands of armored vehicles, artillery pieces, and aircraft. Germany's Army Group B, commanded by Field Marshal Walter Model and responsible for the Remagen sector, had been shredded by months of combat in the Hürtgen Forest and the Ardennes. Many of Model's divisions were operating at 20 to 30% of their authorized strength. The German army in the West was not simply outnumbered. It was outproduced, outfueled, and outfed. American factories had produced roughly 90,000 Sherman tanks during the war. Germany's entire wartime production of Panzer IV, Panther, and Tiger tanks combined came to approximately 33,000. And by March of 1945, fuel shortages meant that thousands of German armored vehicles sat immobile for lack of gasoline. The Luftwaffe had fewer than 1,000 operational aircraft on the Western Front. The United States Army Air Forces and the Royal Air Force controlled the sky over Western Germany with such dominance that German daylight movement had become nearly suicidal. This context matters, because when Hitler ordered the bridge destroyed, he was ordering a crippled military machine to perform a surgical, sustained attack against a point target under the guns of the most powerful army in the world, while that same army was actively reinforcing its bridgehead on the eastern bank. The campaign to destroy the Remagen Bridge was not just a tactical operation. It was a test of whether Germany's most advanced remaining weapons could compensate for its total collapse in conventional military power. They could not. Hitler's response to Remagen was shaped by a philosophy that had governed his military thinking since 1939. The philosophy had a name inside the Wehrmacht: Führerbefehl, the Führer's direct order. In practice, it meant that Hitler retained personal control over decisions that most military commanders would leave to subordinates. He believed, and had staked Germany's survival on the belief, that willpower, audacity, and the application of superior technology could overcome material disadvantage. This belief had produced real results in 1940 and 1941. By 1945, it had become disconnected from military reality. When news of Remagen reached Hitler's headquarters, the Führer Hauptquartier, then located at Ziegenberg in the Taunus Hills, his initial reaction was fury. He immediately relieved 4 officers of their commands and ordered a court-martial. General Rudolf Hübner was appointed to lead a flying court-martial tribunal that executed at least 4 German officers for the failure to blow the bridge, including one who had nothing to do with the demolition decision. Then Hitler turned to the question of destroying the bridge himself. He ordered every available weapon brought to bear. This was not a proportional military response. It was an expression of the doctrine that had defined his entire approach to warfare. Concentrate overwhelming force on a symbolic target, destroy it, and use the destruction to restore morale and demonstrate that Germany's technological superiority remained intact. He had applied this thinking at Stalingrad, insisting the city be held after it became strategically indefensible because of its symbolic value. He applied it at Remagen, ordering the expenditure of irreplaceable weapons, including ballistic missiles that cost the equivalent of millions of dollars each to produce, against a single bridge that the Americans were crossing in sufficient numbers within hours of its capture to make its destruction strategically irrelevant. The bridge had already changed the war. Hitler knew it, and he could not accept it. The Americans captured the bridge on March 7th. By March 8th, less than 24 hours later, the United States Army was already adapting to the situation. General Omar Bradley, commanding the 12th Army Group, received the news by telephone from 1st Army headquarters. Bradley later wrote that he immediately understood the strategic significance. He told Hodges to push everything he could across the bridge. "Hold on to it, Courtney," Bradley said. "Get across with everything you've got." General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, approved expanding the bridgehead. He authorized shifting the priority of effort to the Remagen sector, pulling additional divisions from other axes to exploit the crossing. This was the critical adaptation. The Allies recognized that the capture of an intact bridge was not just a tactical windfall. It was a strategic opportunity that would compress the timetable for ending the war by weeks, possibly months. Every Rhine crossing the Allies had planned had required massive engineering operations, building pontoon bridges under fire, moving assault boats across a 1,000-foot river in the dark, coordinating artillery and air support to suppress the defenders. These operations were ready. They happened anyway, in late March, at other points along the Rhine. But Remagen gave the Allies a bridgehead that was already established, already protected, and already being reinforced, before any of those operations launched. The First Army's engineers worked with remarkable speed. Within 72 hours of the bridge's capture, the Army Corps of Engineers had constructed 2 pontoon bridges alongside the Ludendorff, a heavy pontoon bridge capable of carrying tanks and trucks, and a second infantry footbridge. By March 14th, there were 3 additional pontoon bridges at Remagen. The Ludendorff Bridge itself became almost tactically secondary within a week. The Americans were reinforcing their bridgehead, with or without it. But Hitler kept attacking it anyway. Battle 1. The V2 Campaign. March 9th through March 17th, 1945. The V2 ballistic missile, officially the Aggregat 4, or A4, was the world's first operational long-range ballistic missile. It stood 46 feet tall. It weighed 14 tons at launch. It carried a 1-ton warhead of amytal explosive. It struck its target at approximately 3,500 miles per hour, faster than the speed of sound, which meant the people on the ground heard nothing before impact. There was no defense against it. Germany's SS Gruppe ZBV and the operational V-2 firing units, primarily Lehr- und Versuchsbatterie 444, began targeting the Remagen Bridge with V-2 rockets starting on or around March 9th. 11 V-2 missiles were fired at the Remagen Bridge over the course of approximately 9 days. Not one of them hit it. This was not a failure of the weapon's basic capability. It was a failure of the weapon's fundamental limitation: accuracy. The V-2 had a circular error probable, the radius within which 50% of missiles would land, of approximately 4 to 5 miles. This meant that hitting a specific point target with a V-2 was not a matter of precision. It was a matter of statistics. And the statistics were catastrophically unfavorable. Each missile cost approximately 100,000 Reichsmarks to produce, the equivalent of several million modern dollars when adjusted for production context. Each required liquid oxygen, ethanol fuel, and a sophisticated mobile launching apparatus. Each was irreplaceable. Of the 11 missiles fired, the closest impact was reportedly several hundred yards from the bridge. One missile landed in the town of Remagen itself, killing several civilians. One landed near American troops on the western bank. None damaged the bridge. The German V-2 firing units operating against Remagen were among the last operational ballistic missile units in history to use that weapon in combat. They fired some of the final V-2 missiles ever launched in anger, against a bridge they never touched. Battle 2. The jet bomber attacks. March 8th through March 15th, 1945. The Arado AR-234 was the world's first operational jet bomber. It was powered by two Junkers UMO 004 turbojet engines, each producing approximately 1,980 pounds of thrust. It could reach a maximum speed of approximately 460 miles per hour, fast enough that Allied piston engine fighters struggled to intercept it. The Luftwaffe committed a unit of these aircraft, Kampfgeschwader 76, or KG-76, to the campaign against the Remagen Bridge. The attacks began on March 8th. KG-76 flew repeated bombing missions against the bridge over the course of approximately 7 days, operating from airfields in northern Germany. The aircraft typically operated in small groups of 2 to 4 planes, using their speed advantage to make fast, high-altitude bombing runs. The results were nearly identical to the V-2 campaign. No bombs struck the bridge. The reasons were technical and tactical. High-altitude bombing against a point target as narrow as a railroad bridge was extraordinarily difficult, even with experienced crews using purpose-built precision bombers. The Arado 234, operating at high speed in its bombing role, required a bombsight system adapted from standard-level bombing equipment. It was not designed for precision attacks against small, defended targets. Additionally, the Americans ringed the Remagen bridgehead with one of the densest concentrations of anti-aircraft artillery in the European theater. Estimates suggest the Americans deployed approximately 60 anti-aircraft guns of various calibers around the Remagen perimeter within the first 48 hours of capture. This number grew rapidly. The Arado jets were fast, but they were not immune to flak. Several were damaged. At least a handful were lost over the course of the campaign. The few bombs that came close to the bridge damaged the surrounding area and caused casualties among American troops and engineers on the banks, but the bridge itself was never hit. One German pilot recalled in a post-war interview that the anti-aircraft fire around Remagen was like flying into a wall. Battle 3. The Karl Gerät Assault, March 11th through March 17th, 1945. The Karl Gerät, translated as Karl device or Karl apparatus, was the largest self-propelled artillery piece ever used in combat. It was a siege mortar of extraordinary proportions. The weapon weighed 124 tons. Its barrel fired a shell measuring 60 centimeters, approximately 23½ inches in diameter. The standard high explosive shell weighed 1 ton, 485 pounds. A lighter concrete piercing round weighed 1 ton, 250 pounds. The Karl Gerät moved on its own tracks, but required a heavy crane vehicle to load each shell. It could fire approximately 6 to 12 rounds per hour. Germany had built 7 of these weapons. They had been used at the siege of Brest-Litovsk, Sevastopol, and the Warsaw Uprising. By the time Hitler ordered them to Remagen, only a small number remained operational. Moving one of these weapons to the Remagen sector required significant logistical effort, rail transport, engineer support, and favorable road conditions. The specific Karl Gerät units committed to the Remagen campaign fired multiple rounds at the bridge between approximately March 11th and March 17th. The results were partially different from the other weapons. Several rounds landed close enough to the bridge to cause structural vibration and minor damage. The bridge had already been weakened by the failed demolition on March 7th, by the weight of American vehicles crossing it continuously, and by ongoing German artillery fire. But the Karl Gerät strikes did not bring the bridge down. The weapon's limitation was the same as its predecessors in this campaign: accuracy. A mortar of that size, firing at a range of several miles, could not achieve the precision needed to repeatedly strike a target as specific as a bridge span. And American counter-battery radar was identifying and engaging German gun positions with increasing effectiveness as the days passed. But the bridge was dying anyway. Not from German weapons, from physics. The Ludendorff Bridge had been built in 1916 and 18. It had not been designed to carry the continuous, heavy loads the Americans were driving across it. Tanks, tank destroyers, trucks loaded with ammunition and supplies, artillery pieces, 24 hours a day. The bridge's steel members had been compromised by the failed demolition charges on March 7th. German artillery had scored hits on the structure over the following days. Not precision strikes, but enough shrapnel and concussion to weaken already stressed metal. American engineers repaired damage as fast as it appeared. They worked on the bridge under fire, in the dark, in freezing temperatures. On March 17th, 10 days after its capture, the Ludendorff Bridge groaned, twisted, and collapsed into the Rhine River. It fell, not from a V-2 strike, not from a jet bomb, not from a Karl Gerät shell. It fell because it was old and damaged and exhausted, and the weight of an army crossing it for 10 days had finally broken it. 28 American engineers who were working on the bridge when it fell were killed. 63 others were injured. The fall of the bridge was a tactical blow, but it was strategically irrelevant. By March 17th, the Americans had 5 pontoon bridges at Remagen. They had crossed approximately 25,000 vehicles and roughly 100,000 soldiers into the bridgehead. The bridgehead extended approximately 25 miles wide and 8 miles deep on the eastern bank. The Germans could not push them back. But the cost of those 10 days was real, and it deserves accounting. On the American side, the First Army suffered approximately 8,000 casualties in the Remagen bridgehead during the period from March 7th through late March, killed, wounded, and missing. The exact number, specifically attributable to the German campaign to destroy the bridge, is difficult to separate from the broader fighting in the bridgehead. But American engineers and infantrymen defending the bridge approaches suffered significant losses. The 28 engineers who died when the bridge collapsed were among them. On the German side, the cost was different, but equally damaging. 11 V-2 rockets, each one irreplaceable, each one representing hundreds of skilled man-hours of production and massive quantities of scarce materials, were expended without result. Multiple Arado jet bombers, aircraft Germany was producing at a rate of approximately 40 to 50 per month by early 1945, and desperately needed for other missions, were committed to a campaign they could not win. 2 or more Karl siege mortars were transported to the Remagen sector, requiring logistical resources that German Army Group B could not afford to spare, and the 4 German officers executed by Hitler's flying court-martial, including Captain Karl Bratke, who was later found by a military tribunal to have done everything within his power given the situation, died for a failure that was not entirely, or perhaps not even primarily, their fault. This is the institutional flaw that Remagen exposed most clearly in the German system. Hitler's command structure punished failure without honestly assessing cause. The demolition charges had been set. The detonation had been attempted. The cable had been cut by shell fire, a contingency that required proper backup systems and adequate personnel, both of which had not been provided because of the general collapse of German logistics and manpower. The officers died for a systemic failure that originated not at Remagen, but in Berlin. Germany in the spring of 1945 could still produce remarkable weapons. The V-2 was a genuine technological achievement. The Arado 234 was years ahead of anything the Allies had in operational service. The Karl was the most powerful self-propelled artillery weapon ever built. None of them could destroy a bridge held by 100,000 Americans, with 5 pontoon bridges and air superiority. Germany's leadership had believed, from the earliest days of the war, that technological superiority could substitute for strategic sustainability, that the right weapon, applied at the right moment, could reverse the verdict of industrial and demographic reality. The campaign against the Remagen Bridge is the clearest possible refutation of that belief. The Third Reich could win battles of innovation. It could develop weapons that its enemies could not yet match. But it could not defeat time, production, and the accumulated weight of a coalition whose industrial base dwarfed its own. The V-2, the Arado, the Karl. These were answers to questions the war had already moved past. Germany could build a ballistic missile. It could not build enough bullets. Germany could fly a jet bomber over Remagen. It could not fuel the propeller aircraft that needed to defend the Ruhr. Germany could fire a 1-ton shell from a 124-ton mortar. It could not feed the soldiers who were supposed to stop the Americans from crossing in the first place. The Remagen Bridge did not win the Second World War, but it revealed, with surgical precision, the nature of Germany's defeat. Not a failure of courage, not a failure of ingenuity, a failure of proportion. A leadership that measured success in weapons rather than systems, in spectacle rather than sustainability, in the drama of a single destroyed bridge rather than the mathematics of a continent-scale war. Walter Model, one of Germany's finest defensive commanders, a man who had performed near miracles holding the Eastern Front together through 1943 and 1944, later wrote in his final communications that the war was lost not at the Rhine, but in the factories and fields that fed the armies standing at the Rhine. Model committed suicide in April of 1945 rather than surrender. He understood what Remagen had shown the world. But this story belongs to specific people, not to generals or weapons systems. It belongs to Sergeant Alexander Drabik of Holland, Ohio, a 28-year-old soldier who became the first American to cross the Rhine River since Napoleon's army, running across the Ludendorff Bridge under fire on March 7, 1945, while debris fell around him and German machine guns fired from the eastern towers. Drabik did not think about history when he ran. He thought about not getting killed. He survived the war. He went home to Holland, Ohio. He worked as a butcher. He died in 1993 at the age of 77, having spent nearly 50 years deflecting the historical significance that others attached to the minutes he spent running across a bridge. It belongs to Private First Class Marvin Jensen of the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, one of dozens of young soldiers who crossed the bridge in those first terrifying minutes, many of whom have left no public record beyond their names in unit rosters. It belongs to the American engineers, men from the 509th, the 302nd, the 1110th Engineer Combat Battalions, and others who worked on that bridge in darkness, under artillery fire, repairing damage with their hands, sleeping in shifts on the riverbank, and who were still working when it fell on March 17th. 28 of those men never came home. It belongs to Captain Willy Bratke, the German commander at the bridge, who survived the war, was exonerated of wrongdoing by a post-war German military investigation, and spent years afterward trying to correct the historical record about what actually happened on March 7th. He died in 1982. And it belongs to the German civilians of Remagen, a town of approximately 5,000 people in 1945, who spent 10 days living inside the most intensely attacked square mile in Western Germany, sheltering in cellars while V-2 missiles, jet bombs, and giant mortar shells fell around them. Most survived. The soldiers who crossed the Remagen Bridge were between 18 and 30 years old. The youngest were born in 1926 or 1927. As of the recording of this video, the last of those men, if any survive, are approaching or past 100 years of age. The numbers still living is nearly zero. They crossed a bridge that should not have been there, held it against weapons that should have destroyed it, and in doing so, shortened a war that was already ending, but whose ending still costs thousands of lives every single week. They deserve to be remembered not as symbols or statistics, but as men who ran across a bridge on a cold March afternoon because someone told them to, and because they did not stop. If this story matters to you, subscribe to this channel. New videos every day documenting the wars that shaped our world.